I never really thought about a theory for Army of the Dead because I thought it was one of the dumbest movies that I had ever seen. It was a ridiculous action movie full of cliches, tropes, and a plot that didn't make sense, and I couldn't figure out if it was supposed to be taken seriously or if it was supposed to be more like Zombieland. It wasn't a comedy like Shaun, and it wasn't serious like 28 Weeks or Train to Busan, so the only thing I can compare it to was the Resident Evil franchise. The only real difference is that the Resident Evil movies know exactly what they are, and they never take themselves that seriously or try to develop the characters more than video game characters should be. Alice is just a one-dimensional action character, and there's never any attempt to give her any emotional backstory or any real human emotion. Army of the Dead tries to ride the line of being a simple action flick while also giving the characters emotional depth and attempting to add complexity to the plot by throwing in a generous amount of mystery boxes for us to puzzle over. Now, I don't have to tell you that this fails on all three levels because the action isn't that exciting, the emotional scenes feel shallow and out of place, and the mysteries aren't interesting enough to really stimulate anyone's curiosity. Zack Snyder has a really recognizable filmmaking style. He loves to use an unnecessary amount of slow motion and dramatic, borderline pretentious music to give every scene a false sense of gravity and importance. He also likes to use a high contrast and a desaturated color grading so the bright colors are muted and the shadows are more defined. I like that Snyder has such a recognizable style, but Army of the Dead is the first movie that doesn't look or feel like anything else he's made. It's bright and colorful with no deep shadows, and there's no dramatic music or focus on multiple protagonists. Snyder movies always feel like a 10-episode TV show that's been cut down to a feature-length movie, and because so much attention is given to multiple characters, his movies feel like they would be better if they were TV shows. Justice League is a great example of this. The Snyder Cut was 4 hours long because he wanted to tell a complete story for each character, and it ended up feeling like 5 separate movies all crammed into one. Typically, an extended cut is supposed to make a movie feel more fleshed out and complete, but the Snyder Cut opened up more possible plots that could have been explored, and it made it feel even more underdeveloped than it was before. It was the same with Watchmen, 300, and even with Dawn of the Dead, there was a bonus 20-minute side story about the guy in the gun store. He obviously wants to make his movies longer, and he likes to tell stories from different perspectives, so I'm surprised that he hasn't directed TV shows yet because his filmmaking style seems to be better suited for longer stories with more time to develop lots of different characters. Army of the Dead was so visually different from everything else he's made that it made me wonder if the script was different than the movie we actually saw. It definitely felt like there were a lot of different ideas that never got time to fully develop, so I thought the script might have originally been longer, and the reason the story didn't make sense is because a lot of stuff got left out because of the budget, or maybe it got cut in the editing because the studio didn't want a 4-hour zombie movie. Unfortunately, there isn't a longer cut, and the script was basically the same as the movie, but, and you're probably not gonna believe this, it was honestly one of the best scripts that I had ever read.
This is a sick Negro!
Most people either think this movie is so stupid that it should have never been made, or that it's just a fun action flick that's not supposed to be taken seriously. Now, I had a completely different response to it, and I kind of went through all the stages of bad movie grief after watching it. At first, I was in denial that Snyder would make something so bad, and I thought maybe I just wasn't in the right mood, or maybe I didn't understand the story at first. Then after watching it again, I got angry because I couldn't find a single redeeming quality about it. The story was bad, the characters were one-dimensional and boring, the cinematography was amateurish, and there were so many unanswered questions that didn't feel like they actually had answers. Then I started to question if this was a movie that couldn't be explained or theorized on. And after some incredible writer's block, I started to think that maybe it was more complicated than I gave it credit for, and the genius of it might have completely gone over everybody's head.
Nothing goes over my head.
It takes real skill to write a story like this, and because of that, it demands a much deeper analysis. And I mean a real analysis done by me because no one else seems to recognize how fascinating the story is. For a movie that has so many unanswered questions, you would think there would be a lot of different theories and explanations, but after 2 years, there's only been one theory and it literally doesn't explain anything. Theories are supposed to fill in plot holes and explore possibilities, but the time loop theory is one of the dumbest, most pointless theories ever, and for 2 years, everyone just accepted it.
What the hell is wrong with you?
The time loop theory says the team keeps dying before they can steal the money, and when the bomb drops on the city, everything starts all over again. But the biggest evidence for this idea is also the thing that disproves it. The only reason we accept this idea is because the skeletons in front of the safe are wearing the same outfits, and one of them has the same necklace that Maria has on, except it has 3 holes instead of 4. The holes are supposed to represent the amount of times they've died, but the problem with this idea is obvious. If they're stuck in a time loop, then why are the bodies from the other timelines in this one? Everything should be reset if it was a time loop, and nothing from the previous loop should exist in this one. A time loop is like Edge of Tomorrow, where the protagonist restarts the day if he dies, and the only thing that remains from the previous loop is his memory. There shouldn't be any physical evidence of the previous timelines in the new ones, but in Army of the Dead, the bodies from the previous loops are in the current timeline. And if this movie didn't already have enough unanswered questions, the theory that's supposed to give us an answer not only doesn't answer anything, but it gives us another question that doesn't have an answer. So even if we did accept that the time loop theory was true, it doesn't explain why the bodies are dry skeletons that look like they died 100 years ago. If time is being reset, and the bodies from the previous timelines are stuck in this one, then why is there years worth of decomposition on the bodies? This is supposed to be a theory that makes everything make sense, but it makes about as much sense as Mikey having a YouTube channel killing zombies in a quarantine city that's closed off to the public. There's about 100 different questions that the time loop theory doesn't even address, so I've decided to cook up a few ideas that actually do explain everything. Now this is about to get really complicated, so I'm gonna need your full attention on this one. This was originally one big theory, but it was so complicated that I started to wonder if anyone would even understand what I was trying to say in it, so I cut it up into 3 separate theories that all share a foundational idea. Then after that, I threw in an extra theory that has more to do with the process of how the movie was made and not so much about the narrative.
And here we go.
The Dawn of the Dead remake is one of the best zombie movies ever made. So when the news came out that Snyder was making another zombie movie, everyone thought it was going to be a similar type of movie or maybe an in-universe sequel, but it ended up being a strange mix of Suicide Squad and the Resident Evil movies. It was basically an action movie that took place in a horror movie environment, and the story was focused on the spectacle and mysteries more than the zombies, characters, or the situation they were in. Army of Thieves is a prequel, sequel, spin-off, but the story and tone are so different that you probably wouldn't think they were even connected if they didn't have a similar name. Army of the Dead is like a sci-fi action version of Ocean's 11 with zombies, and Army of Thieves is a straightforward Italian Job style heist movie that really doesn't have anything to do with the zombies. The only thing that really connects the two movies are the safes, so if we ignore the zombies and all of the mystery box stuff for a minute and just focus on the safes, the entire story starts to make so much more sense. At the beginning of Army of Thieves, we learn that a locksmith named Hans Wagner built 4 special safes after his wife and son died. Then he built a 5th safe that he locked himself inside of, and because no one could open it in time to save him, they threw it in the ocean and no one has seen it since. The safes were inspired by the 4 operas that make up composer Richard Wagner's The Ring Cycle, and if we examine the story in the first opera, there's some interesting parallels to the story in Army of the Dead. The story starts with a dwarf named Albric that steals gold from the Rhine Maidens and he uses it to make a magical ring. The ring has the power to control people and rule the world, but before he can use his full power, a god named Wotan steals it and takes it to Valhalla. Actually, Wotan owes 2 giants for building his castle, so he sends them to steal the ring. When they show up to take the ring, they find that Albric is using it to enslave all of the other dwarves, and he has a magical helmet that makes him invisible. Now the parallels in both of these stories are pretty obvious. Wagner's safe has been taken from the ocean, just like the ring was taken from the Rhine Maidens, who also live in the ocean. And the safe can give a person the power to control the world, just like the ring can. I'll explain this more in a minute. The Alpha Zombie is named after the king of the Greek gods, and he lives in a casino named after the home of the gods. Just like Wotan is the king of the Norse gods, and Valhalla is where he lives. Even though Zeus shares all the surface level similarities with Wotan, Tanaka is actually more like Wotan, and Zeus is like Albric. And with that one little change in perspective, we can see the deeper meaning that's hidden in the story. Albric takes the ring from the Rhine Maidens and has the power to enslave people and rule the world, just like Zeus takes the power to control the zombies from the government. Wotan wants the ring for himself, so he sends 2 giants to steal it from Albric, just like Tanaka wants the Alpha Zombie head and he sends Ward and Vanderhoof to steal it from Zeus. When the giants show up to steal the ring, they find that Albric is using it to enslave other dwarves and he's wearing a magical helmet. Just like Ward and Vanderhoof find Zeus controlling the zombies and he's wearing a special helmet too. The giants take the ring from Albric, but one of them dies and the other one runs away with it. Just like Ward dies and Vanderhoof survives, but he's infected with the zombie virus, which has the power to control the other zombies if he ends up turning into Zeus. Now it's not a one-to-one copy, but the similarities are pretty obvious. The main theme of the operas are love, loss, death, and rebirth, and Dieter's journey embodies these themes both literally and metaphorically. Wagner's final opera is called The Twilight of the Gods, a German version of the story of Ragnarok, and the main theme is the cycle of death and rebirth. Army of Thieves is the story of the death of Sebastian and his rebirth as Ludwig Dieter, and in Army of the Dead, Vanderhoof goes through a similar transformation when he enters the safe as his old self and he emerges as someone new. The safes clearly represent something much bigger in the story because every time Dieter opens a new safe, a member of his team gets locked away. It's almost as if a sacrifice is required to access each safe, because even Vanderhoof is locked away after the final safe is open. We never learn why Wagner put so much effort into building these safes or what made them so special, but it feels like the story is leaving out many important details. Technically, anyone should be able to open these safes, but Dieter tells us they can only be opened by someone that's worthy.
Puzzles that could only be solved by those truly worthy.
Wagner built these safes for a reason, and if we believe what Dieter says about them, he thinks they'll open a doorway to another realm.
It's a doorway to another realm, my friends.
We have to assume that Wagner believed this too, and there's only one reason why he would want to build a doorway to an alternate reality. Wagner looks completely normal when he locks himself inside of the fifth safe, but when Dieter sees him in a dream, he looks like he's infected with some type of disease. He built these safes after his wife and son died because he was trying to create a doorway to a parallel dimension where they would be alive. And when he crossed through that doorway, he found a world that was very different than his, and he managed to get infected with the zombie virus before he came back to his normal reality. It makes so much more sense for him to lock himself inside of the fifth safe so he wouldn't spread the disease than it does for him to spend months or even years building 5 special safes because he was sad. So if Dieter is right about the safes, and they're a doorway to another realm, then that means that Army of the Dead isn't about a time loop, but a multiverse of parallel dimensions interacting with each other, just like in Cloverfield Paradox. Just like both of these movies, the Cloverfield movies all feel like completely different stories. The first one is about a Godzilla-like monster that comes out of the ocean, the second one is about people stuck in a bunker while aliens take over the world, and the third one is about astronauts activating a particle accelerator that creates a multiverse and the parallel timelines from the other movies. The Cloverfield Paradox takes place in 2028, and the world is going through an extreme energy crisis, so they made a particle accelerator that could potentially create an infinite amount of energy and save the world. A group of astronauts is sent to live on a space station with the accelerator, and when they turn it on, they rip a hole in space-time that causes multiple parallel realities to smash together. Strange things immediately start to happen, and many of the laws of physics and reality are warped. They find a woman on the ship named Mina that says she's been on the space station for 2 years, even though no one's ever seen her before, and she claims to be the engineer, even though there's already an engineer on board. We learn that she's from another reality where Ava and Tam were never even part of the crew, and they ultimately discover that their space station has crossed over into Mina's reality, and some of the crew and things on the ship have merged. Now, we don't know exactly how many worlds exist in this multiverse, but we know for sure that there's at least 4, just like in Army of the Dead. The events in Cloverfield happened in the year 2009 when the Cloverfield monster attacked New York. The events in 10 Cloverfield Lane happened in the year 2016 when a race of aliens attacked. But in this universe, the world didn't have a Cloverfield monster attack in 2009. The events in the Cloverfield Paradox happened in the year 2028, and 2 universes are shown. One is the Earth 3 universe that's being attacked by giant monsters. This is also the universe that the main characters are from, and in this universe, Ava's kids were killed in an accident. And the second universe that's shown is Earth 4, Mina's universe. This is the universe the main characters cross over into, and in this version of Earth, there's no monsters or aliens, but World War III has been going on for 14 months. In this universe, Ava was never on the space station and both of her kids are still alive, and that makes her decide to want to stay in this universe with Mina so she can see her kids again. And this is the same reason why Wagner built the safes. He wanted to go to another timeline where his wife and kid would still be alive. Everyone thinks we're following one group of people in Army of the Dead, but there's some interesting visual cues that prove we're seeing events happening from the perspective of several identical characters in different dimensions, and the safes being opened are causing the dimensions to overlap. If we use the holes in the necklace as a marker for what dimension the story takes place in, then we can assume that there's at least 4 different parallel timelines in the story. Everything goes perfectly in timeline number 1. The team breaks into the safe, they load up the helicopter, and they escape without any issues, just like we see in Tanaka's explanation. The proof that this isn't just a visual representation of the plan is the fact that the number dials on the safe are different in Tanaka's explanation than they are when we see them later on. This is Tanaka's safe, so if we're seeing this explanation from his perspective, the safe should be the most accurate according to him. But because they don't look the same, we have to assume that both of these events are happening in a different timeline. In this timeline, Martin doesn't go with them into the city, and instead is Mikey's friend that joins the team. In timeline number 2, everybody dies sitting at the table in the casino, and this is where the group of skeletons and the blueprints came from.
Yeah, another set of blueprints to the safe.
Vanderhoof is the only one that manages to escape, but he gets bitten before he hides in the safe, and then he crosses over into timeline number 4. The Vanderhoof that comes out of the safe isn't the same Vanderhoof that we see at the beginning of the movie. This is why we don't see him get bitten, but he has a bite mark after he exits the safe. It's obvious that he never gets bitten here, because Zeus has his mouth open, but Dieter hits him before he can actually bite. There's also aliens in this timeline, and they're responsible for the zombie outbreak, but we'll explore this more in the next theory. There's a scene where Martin and Lily go outside and Martin cuts off the Alpha Queen's head, but in the next scene, they're both back in the casino with the group watching the news report about the bomb being dropped early. If Martin's whole objective was to steal the head and Lily was worried about the zombies being pissed off when they found out, why wouldn't they both just leave the city right then? Or why wouldn't Lily kill him or at least tell the group about what he just did? It's because in this timeline they're actually in the casino watching TV and they never went outside and never cut off the Queen's head. Timeline number 3 is the Army of Thieves timeline, where Dieter never joins the team and the skeletons in front of the safe are from this timeline's dead group. Army of Thieves takes place 6 years before Army of the Dead, and because we see the Las Vegas outbreak happening at that time, it begs the question, why would the government wait 6 years to do anything about the zombies, and why would there still be people in quarantine after that long? This is clearly a different timeline than the main timeline in number 4. Timeline number 4 is where the majority of the story takes place, and it's what we see at the end of the movie. Everyone dies in this timeline except for Kate and Ward, but after they escape in the helicopter, she has to kill him after he turns into a zombie. In this timeline, an unbitten Vanderhoof is pushed into the safe, but it's not the same Vanderhoof we see exit the safe. This is the only timeline where Martin is a bad guy, and the only one where he cuts off the Queen's head and gets killed by the tiger. This is also the only timeline with traps in front of the safe. In the Cloverfield paradox, different things from each reality can merge and cross over, causing many strange details that don't seem to make sense. Like Earth 3 and Earth 4's Volkov merging into one body, Mina from Earth 4 being found in the walls of the ship from Earth 3, and Schmidt from Mina's universe being a spy, but the Earth 3 Schmidt getting blamed for it even though he isn't a spy. And this is what happened with Martin. He does have a secret agenda in the number 4 timeline, but not in the number 2 and number 3 ones, and he doesn't even go with them in timeline number 1. So when you look at these movies as a multiverse where the safes are a doorway to parallel universes, things like the skeletons wearing identical clothes and the booby traps in front of the safe start to make perfect sense. Dieter opened Wagner's 4th safe in the number 1 timeline, and that's what created the multiverse. So just like Mina crossed over from her natural timeline, things like the skeletons and the blueprints from the other timelines crossed over into number 4. So the traps in front of the safe were only in the number 4 timeline, but they weren't there to keep people out of the safe. Tanaka put them there to stop things from using the safe as a doorway to enter his timeline from other realities.
I need to stop smoking this shit here, boy.
In the Cloverfield paradox, they explain that the particle accelerator not only opened a doorway between dimensions, but also affected the past, present, and future of each one.
Every time they tested, they risked ripping open the membrane of space-time, smashing together multiple dimensions, and not just here and now, in the past, in the future, in other dimensions.
So even though the main story takes place in 2028, the other dimensions can have a completely different history. So events like the original Cloverfield or 10 Cloverfield Lane can happen in the past before 2028 when the multiverse was created. I bring this up because Wagner could have traveled into the past or future of a different timeline, and I think the world he crossed over into was the future of timeline number 2, where Vanderhoof was originally bitten. Wagner started off in timeline number 3 in 1951, but then crossed over into the future of timeline number 2 where he got infected. Then he went back to his original number 3 timeline and locked himself inside of the 5th safe. Years later, the safe was found in the ocean by the military, and a zombie Wagner infected people when he opened it. This is how the number 3 timeline got zombies, and why the outbreak in Army of Thieves happened 6 years before Army of the Dead. Even though we never see any aliens in these movies, there's a few things that suggest that these are actually aliens and not zombies. We know the government has something to do with the so-called zombies because Zeus is being taken away from Area 51. Area 51 is famous for being associated with aliens, and we even see 2 UFOs fly away when the convoy is leaving the military base. So what do we know for sure? We know for sure there's UFOs. We also know the alphas can't be zombies because they can communicate, have babies, and they even have a group hierarchy and complex emotions. We know Zeus was a soldier, and we also know that some of them look like robots. Now those are all factual things that you can't deny, and it's more than enough information to put together some basic conclusions that explain everything. Now the obvious path is to assume that aliens have something to do with all this, and because the alphas are very clearly not zombies, it's more likely that Zeus was a soldier that was experimented on with something extraterrestrial. Or maybe the government recovered a crashed alien ship and the alien pilot infected the soldier that would eventually become Zeus. Now I know this is going to sound like some elaborate fanfiction at first, but all I'm doing is creating a narrative based on the verified information that we have. So here's what I think happened. The military recovered a crashed alien ship with the alien pilot still inside of it, and they discovered his body was infested with microscopic robots called nanites that were rapidly repairing its injuries. It eventually repaired itself enough to gain consciousness and killed a bunch of the scientists and soldiers, and the only one that survived was the soldier that would eventually become Zeus. Just like the alien, his injuries rapidly started to heal, and it was discovered the soldier contracted some of the alien nanites during the attack. In addition to the healing, he also gained an increase in strength and speed, but over the next few days his physical appearance started to change, his ability to communicate verbally started to deteriorate, and he became unreasonably aggressive. Now the reason he started having all the negative side effects is because the nanites don't understand human anatomy, and even though they were designed to repair and improve biological material, they were specifically made for alien biology. The reason some of them have glowing eyes and look like robots is because the nanites are attempting to improve their biology by fixing imperfections and enhancing their physical abilities like improving their vision or reinforcing their skeletal system. And what about Vanderohe? We only see a few people get turned into zombies, and they all share something in common that doesn't apply to him. The soldiers in the beginning get turned, the guard at the quarantine camp, and then Ward after the helicopter crash. The soldiers in Ward turn almost immediately, and we never see the process of the guard, so we can't say how long it took, but Ward and the soldiers both died when they were bitten, so they were brought back almost immediately. Whereas Vanderohe's bite wasn't life-threatening, so it would take much longer for him to turn. But it could also be the nanites finally figuring out human biology and giving him all the benefits with none of the side effects that Zeus had. Think about this. Vanderohe broke out of a closed vault, survived walking through a freshly nuked Las Vegas, and then walked across the desert carrying hundreds of pounds of money. The nanites were protecting him from the radiation and giving him the ability to survive things that a normal person couldn't, just like they were created to do. The reason the zombies didn't try to leave Las Vegas is because the nanites are part of a colony, and they'll always stay near the alpha just like bees to a queen. Every infected person will also follow the alpha's orders just like the Night King. And this is the reason why Tanaka wanted the zombie head, because he wanted to become like Vanderohe with all the healing and enhancements, but without any of the side effects. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know I have this habit of recognizing similarities in things. And within the first few minutes before the opening credit song even played, I noticed a scene that was directly copied from another movie. And I don't mean it was similar, I mean it was literally identical. Now, I always say there's only a limited amount of different stories we can tell, and most of the stuff we're watching is just the same ideas and visuals remixed and remade in different ways. So there's always going to be scenes that unintentionally look similar to other movies, but this is a direct ripoff, and there's no way Snyder shot this and didn't know he was stealing a scene from American Werewolf.
Where we going? I don't know. I'll tell you when we get there. Okay, cause
It really scared me.
you really scared me, you shithead.
But it doesn't stop there. As the movie went on, I noticed so many other things like the hallway scene from Silent Hill, the alpha zombies look and act like the bad guys from Ghost of Mars,
Yep, the Shamblers.
Then there's the zombie tiger from a low-budget flick called Zombie Apocalypse, and the way Martin dies was exactly like the bear attack from The Revenant. Then there's the booby traps from Indiana Jones, and then we have the motherlode of plagiarism with Aliens. The obvious Vasquez copy who looks, acts, and dies in the exact same way. Martin, who's an almost exact copy of Carter Burke, who was sent in with the team to secretly bring back a xenomorph, just like Martin was sent to bring back a zombie head.
You don't see them fucking each other over.
You don't see them fucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
Even the fact that the Space Marines go to LV-426 and the Army of the Dead crew go to Las Vegas. Now I know that's a reach, but the ending is almost identical too when Scott tells Peters not to take off while he goes in to rescue his daughter. And when he comes back, the chopper is missing, but then it pops up out of nowhere. There's honestly not a single original idea in this movie. And if you go to tvtropes.org, you'll see that every single scene and detail is a trope that you could easily find in a dozen other movies. So what does this all mean? How is it possible to make a movie made up entirely of tropes and copied scenes from other movies? Now, I said in the beginning that it takes real skill to write a story like this. And because of that, I think this movie was written by an AI program. Now just hear me out for a second. It's nearly impossible to write something like this and not notice all the plot holes and nonsensical motivations, especially because the entire plot hinges on a plan that doesn't even make sense from the very beginning. Everything about this is so stupid that I'm surprised it even structurally holds up as a movie. But that's the genius part about it. If you tried to write a story like this, it would be nearly impossible for it to even function. I feel like this was written by somebody that's seen a lot of movies, but they don't actually understand what they're watching. It's like if you asked a little kid to write a script based on movies that they've seen and they can remember scenes and details, but they really don't understand the purpose of them or how they fit into a bigger narrative. There's been a lot of debate on whether AI will eventually replace writers, musicians, and artists because even in this early stage of development, it's already able to create interesting artwork, songs, and stories. Now, it's not at the stage of being able to legitimately compete with real artists yet, and it's possible that it never will, but Army of the Dead is exactly what I would expect an AI-generated script to look like. Now, if I was hired to write this, I would have taken a more traditional approach and used some basic misdirection so it ended up being like From Dusk Till Dawn or Predator, and made the second half of the movie a completely different genre than the first. Dusk Till Dawn starts off with a pair of thieves kidnapping a family and trying to make it across the border into Mexico, but then it turns into a grindhouse horror flick about vampires killing truckers in a Mexican bar. And Predator starts off like a classic 80s big muscle action flick, and then it turns into a sci-fi horror survival film about an alien hunting mercenaries in the jungle. Army of the Dead should have done something similar and started out like Ocean's 11 where a team of thieves is trying to rob a casino, and then in the middle of the heist have the zombies take over Vegas. I would have saved the outbreak scene from the opening credits until the middle of the movie, and instead of having a wall around the city, I would have had the military fighting to keep the zombies from escaping, and that would have given the government a reason to blow it up because they didn't want them to escape. The decision to drop a nuke on Vegas would have been made right away, so the crew would have been stuck with the military surrounding the city, and they only had like 12 hours to find a way to escape. This way, it would have avoided a lot of the unanswered questions, and it would have had a more logically structured story. Damn! This video took me way longer than I wanted it to take. I was working on some other stuff, so I think I'm dropping 2 videos for you today, but I had like 4 other ideas I wanted to put into this, but I started to feel like this was already getting too complicated, and I was just getting really exhausted still thinking about this idea, and the ideas were more related to other movies, and it wasn't necessarily things that I realistically thought could be things that this movie would actually explain. I mean, I don't think Snyder really has any explanation for this. I think he's just wanted to create something that was provocative or interesting and get people to talking, but realistically, I think it's not going to go anywhere. It's been a few years since he dropped this movie, and you haven't really heard anything else about it. But I do think he's probably going to try to do some sort of Cloverfield thing. The time loop thing doesn't really make sense, and when people suggested it to him, he had a response like he thought it was interesting, but it wasn't something that he really thought of. When he says, "Oh, I really like that idea," well, that means that wasn't something that you were really thinking this was going to be. But the other ideas that I had, because I had about 4 other ideas, and one of them was a relationship to Cabin in the Woods, because as I said with this last idea, there were so many things in this movie that were similar to other movies that it was just really strange to me that you could make a movie like that where everything is a reference to something else or similar to something else. But it was basically Tanaka sending in this group of people, and he intended for them to die the entire time. That's why I didn't give them the code and tell them about the traps. And this was all a setup because they all had to die. So remember in the movie, like they had to, different types of people had to get sacrificed. And then there was another one that I kind of stopped halfway because I really didn't believe it was something that was possible for this story. But it was more about Tanaka being the one caught in a time loop. And every time he was trying to, like you saw the skeletons in front of the crew, in front of the safe, and that was only part of the crew because he hadn't hired Dieter yet. And so each time he was putting newer people on the team. And so next time he would eventually, get the right amount of people, and kind of like Edge of Tomorrow a little bit. And then the Westworld one was the most realistic one. That one I probably could do if you wanted to see it. I just can't edit it that well. But it was probably going to be about 10 minutes. I could probably do it shorter, but it made a lot of sense and it was perfect. And I said, even when I wrote it down, so it's kind of a cheat code explanation to say that everything's a Westworld park, but it actually fits really, really well with this. And there's a lot of similarities in it, but just let me know. I could probably just say it and just tell you guys about it and do a very minimal amount of editing, but let me get working on something else. I hate having everybody wait so many months for me to come out with stuff, but I guarantee I'm going to have a few more things this week because I'm already done with a few things. So, all right, see you next time.